traditional wet weather diseases you might be seeing, but you might be seeing a bit more mildew, or you might be seeing a little bit more rust. So I think just to tailor the programme a little bit to cover those, there might be some degree of flexibility with rate. But I think, you don't take the eye off the ball just because you're not seeing the traditional wet weather diseases, but just watch rust, watch mildew in particular, I suppose, at the moment with spring wheat and spring oats there in particular.
With the recent spell of good weather and a forecast for it to last well into next week, it's taken some pressure off getting fieldwork completed. However, the lack of moisture is beginning to bite, with parts of some fields starting to burn off. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. While the dry conditions have helped reduce disease pressure in many crops, there's still a long way to go before harvest. And with that, plenty of key decisions need to be made over the coming days to maximise the potential in crops. I'm delighted today to be joined by John Pettit, a tillage advisor based in Wexford, and Ciaran Collins, a tillage specialist in Teagasc, to discuss the key agronomy actions we should consider over the next week or so. Ciaran, the soil moisture deficits are, approaching 40-45 mils across the country. Has that started to show up in crops that you're seeing?
Yeah, just in the last few days, Michael, definitely starting to see it. And I know there was odd places maybe got bits of showers over the weekend and that, but I'd say most of the tillage area didn't from what I can gather. So yeah, we're just starting to see that mainly on light ground. And the first place that's shown up in the area I'm in anyway is late sown barley. That would be the one that would be most affected. Having said that, look, the winter cereals so far, apart from very, very light ground, are okay. And even the early sown barley, to be fair, most of it so far isn't too bad. But look, as you say, the forecast is dry for the next 7 days anyway, possibly 10. So look, we would expect to see more drought symptoms showing up then,
Showing up. And John, down in the southeast, down in your part of the world, are you seeing anything there yet?
Yeah, again, Michael, spring barley, and particularly spring barley on lighter ground, is starting to show signs of some drought stress. But again, later drill crops that were starting to recover from the heavy rainfall of 3 to 4 weeks ago, they actually need rain, need it badly to fully recover. But generally, Michael, earlier drill crops are looking well. It won't be long until they start to suffer from a bit of drought stress. But again, it's the later drilled crops that were drilled on heavier soils that are worse affected, Michael.
Okay. Ciaran, there's been a good few mentions around the country around trace elements deficiency starting to show up. Are you hearing much of that out there?
You'd see bits of it. And again, now I suppose we're back to the lighter ground as well, or maybe ground that's maybe suffering from a moisture deficit. I think some of these are transient type deficiencies that we often see in these scenarios, like particularly magnesium is the one that shows up very, very quickly. And obviously you can see nitrogen showing up as well. It's just, look, the plant's root structure, there's enough moisture there to take up the nutrients that are in the soil. So we're seeing a little bit of it. I would say it's, again, like John said, it's mostly spring barley I'm seeing it in. I think the winter cereals, they have a good root structure, well developed. I don't anticipate too many problems, hopefully, from here on out in those cases. But certainly the spring ones, you would see some of those deficiencies, all right, but mainly spring barley.
And if if a farmer kind of came up with some of those trace element deficiencies, magnesium or manganese is maybe kind of showing up as well. Not a lot of rain for the next 10 days, maybe. So it's unlikely to ease, I suppose, from that point of view. Should a farmer, Ciaran, be going back in there and even if there's nothing else due and trying to top up that a little bit?
Well, the first thing to say is there's nothing that I've seen that a day's rain or a good shower rain in a lot of cases wouldn't solve. But obviously, as you say, look, that's maybe not going to happen, I think if I'd always kind of break it into two. If there's an inherent deficiency, something that always shows up in a field, whether it's magnesium or manganese or that, and you're expecting to see it, you have to treat it because it's there, it's inherent, it's in the soil. The second part of it then are these more transient type deficiencies. Again, if you're going in with a fungicide and you're seeing it, the likes of magnesium in particular, it certainly can help. It's not, and I suppose this is the key one, it's not going to transform a crop. That's the key message. But sometimes it can help maybe just keep that leaf maybe greener for that little bit longer. It can help, but look, it's not the solution, but maybe some part of a help, I suppose, really.
John, just come back to you. For the most part, are farmers generally speaking up to date with most of the crop management tasks, that should have been done?
I suppose, Michael, in terms of winter crops, take winter wheat, winter oats, winter rye and whatnot, yeah, they are. Obviously, T2s are just about to start to go on crops. So generally T2s will go on from the middle of this week till the middle of next week, depending on drilling date, variety and whatnot. But there is a nice bit of outstanding work on spring barley. Guys would have, and spring oats as well, guys would have held off, Michael, on applying a herbicide. Expecting to see rainfall over the weekend. So you would have expected a crop that was suffering from a bit of drought stress to recover. Then you would have applied your herbicide. But I got no end of phone calls on Monday with guys inquiring, what do I do at this point in time, John? And I suppose the answer to them is, if you've got a crop that is is due to be sprayed with a herbicide, and in some cases, and a fair share of cases, Michael, probably overdue, the thing is to go sooner rather than later. Because if you're going to apply it in a week's time, the crop is only going to be further stressed, and you're applying a herbicide to a crop when it's actually suffering from more stress, and it would have more of an adverse effect on the crop then thereafter.
Okay. The other one, John, is a few people have been talking about, they're going into crops there now. Nitrogen has been applied 2 to 3 weeks, but they can still see visual signs of that nitrogen on the ground. Is that any sort of a worry? Is it still there, kind of hanging around, not doing anything, or is it actually in the soil and kind of waiting for a bit of soil moisture to really get going?
Yeah, this is a conversation that happens in it's a frequent conversation, Michael, that comes up, and again, it's come up over the years as well. But generally, Michael, if you look at a granule, is only it's a carrier for the nitrogen. And if you just get your finger and just tip the granule, usually the granule will it'll disintegrate, right? So all you're left with is the carrier itself. The nitrogen at that stage is actually moved out of the granule and it's actually in the soil. So no, the fact that I'm looking at granules doesn't concern me. I suppose the big thing people need to do is the granule still firm? So if something has gone out relatively recently, and if it hasn't got heavy dews or a small bit of rainfall, you could still have a firm granule. A fair share of nitrogen could be still in the granule, but once a granule disintegrates upon you touching it, Michael, the nitrogen is moved out of it at that point in time.
Okay, so nothing to worry about there. Ciaran, I just want to go back to you, and John mentioned a second ago there about some of the herbicide treatments that are necessary on some of the spring crops. A lot of them might have got it already. And I was thinking about a conversation we were having a few days ago around herbicide-resistant weeds across the country. With some of the crops that have already received that herbicide, is there an action a farmer should take maybe on a kind of a post-control scenario to go in and see what's well controlled, or is there resistance out there?
I think it's a vital thing to do, especially now, maybe say 2-3 weeks after herbicide application. I suppose people generally know what they're looking for on a farm. I suppose the obvious ones that are cropping up are chickweed, speedwell, corn marigold, poppies, and where you have that problem, you probably have put in something for that. But just to go back, have a look, what level of control have I got? Because in general, I think the application weather and those things have been fairly good this year. So just see what you've got. And I suppose the classic one is where you've got, a weed control, say a chickweed controlled, and then you've got a one uncontrolled next to it. That's a real telltale sign. So it's well worth going back in and investigating. It's a great time of year to do it because you still have a backup maybe that you can put something else on,
And speaking about that, if say a farmer does find a little bit of maybe chickweed or potentially marigold, which is probably a really tricky one there, what is the action that can be done now at this stage if there's a herbicide already been applied?
Yeah, depending on what you've applied already. So I suppose there's a process to go through. Did I put on enough of what it was required to control that weed? That's the first thing. And then, just for argument's sake, take corn marigold. We know that clopyralid is probably the best chemical to control it. But if you've got, corn marigold that's big, say 4-6 inches, maybe even bigger at this stage, that's going to require higher rates of clopyralid. So a litre, say for argument's sake, a Galaxy will give you about 80 grams, but you may need more to control bigger stuff. So the first thing you look at is, what rate did I use? Maybe that rate was too low, and then follow up with a subsequent treatment, but just ensure that that rate is high enough to control a strong weed, and obviously adhere to the label guidelines and all those. You have to be careful on that. But I think it is a great time just to get back in and see what you have, because there is still time to take remedial action.
And I suppose, Ciaran, there's probably no harm maybe in that scenario if you are finding something there to call your advisor who might have been helping you out in the first place, just to to come back in and assess with you to see what's there, because it's not just about this year, it's about the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because those weeds aren't going away, I suppose.
Absolutely. And if I could throw another one in there that crops up quite a bit in where I live, is canary grass. So, canary grass can come from depth, and you can get a number of different flushes as a result. So if you're in early, say with the likes of axial, you may have, got good control, but you may get a second flush, so it's again just to watch stuff like that, so that might not be a resistance issue. That might actually be just a second flush that's come. So as you say, maybe get your advisory in as well and have a look at it and assess what the issue is.
Okay. John, just to change it around a little bit, just going back maybe to some disease control, and maybe focusing on winter wheat, because I think the flag leaves are out or just about out on most crops, and it's probably due it's the main fungicide treatment. Given, John, that there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of threat from septoria, maybe in particular, given all that dry weather, but maybe there's other things out there, mildews and rusts that are there. But is there an opportunity, John, to reduce rates of the main fungicide, maybe to save a bit of money? Because, the threat of some of those diseases isn't maybe as high as it would have been other years.
Generally, Michael, the answer to that would be no. But again, you need to look at each individual situation. If you look at winter wheat does have septoria in it. You can expect that winter wheat will always have septoria in it to some degree. Even take a variety such as Fitzroy, which is actually one of our better varieties on septoria. It's actually quite surprising how much septoria is down in the base of Fitzroy. But again, it's because it was a variety strong on septoria. It's a variety that we would have sown earlier. Dawson would have been a variety that you would have held off on because it was weaker on septoria. But being honest with you, Michael, considering the amount of septoria that's present in crops, I know we have low disease pressure, but we need to be conscious of the fact that varieties themselves were not blessed with the ratings on septoria. I would not spare rate, Michael, being honest with you. Wheat is a crop that can be very rewarding as well, and we can't afford to let septoria into it. So if you were to take something like a Questar pontoon type product, and there will be alternatives as well, such as Asker Expo and so on, I would be talking about an absolute minimum of an 80% rate, and probably, preferably, Michael, closer to a 90% rate.
And that's going to, John, control anything you want. That will that do septoria well? Will it do rust well? And I'm hearing people talking about a bit of mildew now starting to show up in Champion, especially.
I suppose, Mike, you need to look at the product and the component active ingredients within the product. So if you take something like Questar pontoon, right, pontoon is going to have tebuconazole and protaconazole in it. Protaconazole as an active, right, will actually be good on mildew preventatively. So if you've got a bit of mildew, if you've got a very small level of mildew and it's predominantly down in the base of the crop, or if it's stem mildew, which I've seen a very small amount of, protaconazole will do enough for you. So you need to look at the product that you're applying. If it's got protaconazole in it, well, then you're going to get good preventative control of mildew, but it won't offer curative control.
Okay. Is there any case, John, where mildew might be a little bit worse to add a mildewicide, or are we kind of up against it in terms of fairly decent canopies and it's hard enough to get fungicide down that low anyway?
So again, Michael, if it depends on the given situation, you need to look at your individual crop. Again, if you've got mildew in a crop, and if you've got a tick crop, you're never going to get, if you decide to apply turn at maybe up to half a litre, but the turn has to actively hit the mildew. So if you've got a very dense crop, dense canopy, you're not going to get your fungicide product down to the base of the plant. So you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve, that being disease, to eradicate or kill disease. So really, you'd only be applying something that's going to have active control of mildew only if the mildew is starting to rise in the crop. So if it's starting to rise up and if it start to appear on upper leaf, yeah, at that stage you would definitely put in something that's going to be active against mildew. So products of that nature would include Tern or Midas.
Ciaran, would it be a similar kind of way down in your part of the world, in terms of that, what John was talking about for disease control on winter wheat?
Yeah, look, you never take your eye off the ball with Septoria. That goes without saying, And I mean, we're only in the middle of May now. There's another good 4 weeks of weather to look at there. The one I suppose that we're seeing down here to some degree, not hugely, but is yellow rust. Now, yellow rust is not something that we normally have an issue with. People that would have been growing grain would have been prepared with it earlier on. They might have put maybe a T0 in there, just something to cover yellow rust. But what I'm finding, Michael, locally is the likes of Champion, where people didn't put in a specific yellow rust product at T0 timing. But what they're finding since the T1s went out, they're finding little patches in the field of burnt out areas from yellow rust, but very little of the pustule. So I suppose it gives a good indication that the fungicides that went out at which would generally be Revistar or your Inatrek-based products, that they are having activity on that rust, So again, you'd hope that that'll happen with these T2s that are going on these days, And it's important, I suppose, rate-wise, just to keep that rust under control, because it could do that damage if it got motoring,
Okay, want to keep your eye on. And Ciaran, while you're there, just to talk a little bit about, John mentioned earlier, about some jobs that are due on some crops, and maybe with a little bit of stress out there at the moment. The likes of spring wheat and oats, they're kind of motoring through the growth stages, maybe up around that kind of growth stage where a PGR is due. Is that something that people should be going after? If these kind of nearly drought conditions are going to persist?
Yeah, I think what you do with the crop, especially around PGR, and I'll add spring barley to that because, it's like Laureate maybe for malting and stuff. Dry conditions is a natural PGR anyway. So I think you have to make a decision based on the conditions and the state of the crop, I think, look, spring oats and spring wheat will get a PGR anyway, but I think just be careful about the rates. And maybe it mightn't be what you put on last year. You might pull back a little bit. And I suppose the other point on it, in not to overstress the crop, is maybe try and, watch tank mixes. If the weather is dry, you'll get an opportunity maybe to go through it twice. And if you can separate it all, the better. And then maybe spray in the evening. Don't spray in the heat of the day around midday or that period there. Just maybe if you can do that growth regulation in the evening, it does help. It certainly does alleviate some of the stress.
Okay. And I suppose maybe just the last question, Ciaran, for this time round, just in terms of, again, that kind of the threat of disease, is there an opportunity to reduce the level of fungicides that we normally put on, or is there still too much time to go and you wouldn't know what would happen?
Well, look, I think the dry weather helps, and we've seen that in wheat. And look, both myself and John have said you still don't take the eye off the ball with Septoria, obviously. But the reality is that there's less Septoria in crops at this time this year than there normally is. So that's a positive. The weather does that. For the crops that need to be sprayed, I think there's some flexibility on rate, definitely. But you might get we're not seeing wrinkle, we're not seeing net blotch, but we're seeing mildew, we're seeing bits of rust. So again, it's sort of, the traditional wet weather diseases you mightn't be seeing, but you might be seeing a bit more mildew, or you might be seeing a little bit more rust. So I think just to tailor the program a little bit to cover those. Look, there might be some degree of flexibility with rate, but I think, you don't take the eye off the ball just because you're not seeing the traditional wet weather diseases, but just watch rust, watch mildew in particular, I suppose, at the moment with spring wheat and spring oats there in particular.
Perfect. Listen, Ciaran and John, thank you very much for your time. Certainly there's loads of information there. And look, hopefully farmers will get a chance to do whatever they want to get done over the next week. It looks like there's enough good weather at least anyway. And they'll get it done in the conditions, as you say, Ciaran, that suit. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, lads.
So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Ciaran and John for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget there's a Tillage Signpost Farm Walk taking place in Don Summers Farm in Oilgate, Wexford next week, Wednesday the 21st of May from 11 to 1 p.m. This promises to be an excellent event and well worth the trip. Don has embraced precision farming to make the most of organic manures and added value products, boosting farm profitability while also improving sustainability. So that's it, and finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.